I need you to understand that I am not telling you this story because I am brave. I am telling you this story because Counselor Davi Thenis asked me to, 17 years ago, in a room that smelled like iodine and copper and old rain. And I said no. I said no 9 more times across 9 more years. Then Davi died in a hospital on Resk 4, surrounded by her children and a human nurse who sang something I didn't recognize. And the last thing Davi ever recorded was a message to me that said, "Tell it, Oren, not for them. For the next person who thinks silence is safety. So I am telling it." My name is Oren Tesavari. I was 4th Cultural Attaché to the Concord Diplomatic Bureau, Western Spiral Division. That title sounds important. It was not. I processed transit visas. I reviewed seating arrangements. I once spent 11 days resolving a dispute over whether a Bravari trade delegate's emotional support lichen constituted a biological hazard at formal dinners. It did, as it turned out. Bravari lichens secrete a mild paralytic when they sense hostility, and there was quite a lot of hostility at formal dinners. I was nobody, but I was nobody in the right room. The room was the Concord Athenaeum on Jalissa Station, and the date was what humans would call October 14th. I remember this because humans measure time strangely, and I had learned their calendar as part of my duties preparing for the arrival of Earth's first accredited ambassador to the Galactic Concord. Ambassador Elara Castillo. I will say her name as many times as I need to. The Concord spent 6 years trying to make everyone forget it. I am done helping them. Elara Castillo arrived on Jalissa Station at 0600 local time aboard a human vessel called the Meridian, which was small and gray, and looked like it had been designed by people who cared more about the engines than the paint. She was 53 years old. She had dark hair with gray in it that she did not dye. She wore a blue suit that didn't fit perfectly across the shoulders, and she carried a leather briefcase that I learned later had belonged to her father, who had been a teacher in a city called Bogota. She walked through the Athenaeum's main corridor with 2 aides and no guards. I watched her from the processing gallery, and what I remember is that she looked tired. Not nervous, not performatively confident, just tired. The way someone looks when they have been working very hard for a long time and know the work is not finished yet. I stamped her transit documentation personally. My hand was steady, my conscience was not. Because I already knew what was going to happen to her, not the specifics. I want to be precise about that. I did not know the method. I did not know the hour. But I had been in the Bureau long enough to read the atmospheric pressure of a room, and for 3 weeks the pressure had been building towards something I chose not to name. Meetings I was excluded from. Encryption upgrades on communications channels I normally accessed freely. A Valkyrie security detail reassigned to the Athenaeum substructure for what my supervisor called infrastructure review. Valkyrie do not review infrastructure. Valkyrie break things. That is what they are contracted for. I said nothing. That is the first thing I need you to understand about me. I am not the hero of this story. I am the man who stamped the transit visa and said nothing, and everything that follows is colored by that fact, and I will not permit you to forget it even if you want to. The Galactic Concord, for those of you unfamiliar, was not a government. It was a framework, a set of agreements between the 11 major spacefaring civilizations of the Western Spiral, designed to manage trade, prevent wars, and most critically control the rate at which younger species acquired influence. The Concord had existed for over 4,000 standard years. It had admitted exactly 3 new species in that time. Humanity was to be the 4th. The process was called accession. It was supposed to take between 10 and 40 years. Earth had been in pre-accession status for 12. Ambassador Castillo's appointment was the culmination of that process, the first human to hold full diplomatic standing within the Concord, with a vote, a voice, and treaty-protected immunity. This was, in theory, a celebration. In practice, it was a problem, because Earth had done something none of the younger species were supposed to do. It had grown too fast, not militarily, though the Concord's intelligence arms were quietly alarmed by human shipbuilding rates, but economically. Human trade networks had spread through frontier systems like root systems through soil, quiet and persistent and suddenly everywhere. 3 of the 11 Concord members had human-built components in their commercial fleets. 2 had licensed human medical technologies. 1, the Thesari Combine, had contracted a human firm to redesign their agricultural distribution network. and the results had been so efficient that Thesari food prices dropped 9% in a single fiscal cycle. Humans were useful. That was the problem. Useful things are tolerable only as long as they remain dependent. The moment they acquire standing, a vote, a voice, a seat, usefulness becomes leverage, and leverage in the hands of a species the Concord did not fully understand was, to certain members, existentially unacceptable. I did not think in these terms at the time. I thought, the humans are moving too fast. Someone will correct this. That is how the system works. I was correct. I simply had the wrong idea of what correction meant. The formal accession ceremony was scheduled for the third day of Ambassador Castillo's visit. The intervening days were reserved for bilateral meetings, cultural exchanges, and what the Bureau euphemistically called social calibration. A series of dinners and receptions designed to let the new ambassador demonstrate that she understood the hierarchy she was entering. Castillo did something unexpected at the first reception. She listened. I was stationed at the perimeter of the Tesserae ballroom, monitoring for protocol infractions, when she approached the Keth Sorali delegation. The Keth are old. Not ancient in the way humans use the word genuinely old. Their civilization predating faster than light travel by 2 full technological epochs. They do not enjoy being spoken to by younger species. They consider it a form of contamination. Castillo walked up to Prelate Keth Oren, who was 900 years old and had once declined to acknowledge the existence of an entire species because their music irritated him, and said nothing. She stood beside him. She held a glass of something she wasn't drinking, and she waited. Keth Oren looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You are the one they're going to kill." The room didn't hear it. I heard it because I was 3 meters away, pretending to inspect a decorative pillar. Castillo said, "Probably. And you came anyway." The position needed filling. Keth Oren made a sound I had never heard a Keth make before. It took me years to identify it. He was laughing. "Your species," he said, "has an admirable relationship with futility." "We call it stubbornness," she said. "It's one of our better features." She stayed beside him for 40 minutes. They spoke about soil composition. Keth Oren was apparently an amateur botanist, and Castillo's father had grown coffee in the hills outside Bogotá, and the two of them stood in the most politically charged room in the Western Spiral, discussing nitrogen fixation, while empires circled around them like birds over a field. I watched this and I thought, she knows. She knew what was coming. She had come anyway. And she was spending her remaining time talking about dirt with a 900-year-old alien who found her species amusing. I went home that night and could not sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I was ashamed, and I did not yet have the honesty to call it that. The accession ceremony began at 1400 on the third day. The Athenaeum's grand chamber was designed to diminish. That was its function. The ceiling was 40 meters high. The walls curved inward at angles calculated to make anyone standing at the central podium feel observed from every direction simultaneously. The delegations sat in tiered galleries arranged by seniority, the oldest civilization's highest, so that addressing the Concord meant looking up, always up, at rows of faces that had been watching younger species fumble for millennia. There were 1,100 people in that room. Castillo walked to the podium alone. Her aides remained at the chamber's edge. She set her father's briefcase on the podium, opened it, removed a single sheet of paper, actual paper, which caused a minor stir, and looked up at the galleries. "Members of the Concord," she said. "My name is Elara Castillo, and I am here on behalf of 8 billion human beings who asked me to say hello." A few diplomatic murmurs. The Thesari delegates smiled. The Keth delegation was motionless, which for Keth indicated attention. "I'm not going to give you a speech about what humanity offers," she said. "You already know what we offer. You've been buying it for a decade." That landed. I saw the Valkyrie trade minister's posture shift. "What I want to talk about is what we're asking for. We're asking for a seat, one voice among 11, soon to be 12. We're not asking to lead. We're not asking to be equal to civilizations that have been building for thousands of years longer than we have. We're asking to be present, to be in the room when decisions are made that affect our people." She paused. "That's it. That's the whole thing. I flew 400 light years to ask if we could sit down. I remember thinking it was a good speech. Simple, unthreatening, carefully designed to make the request seem so modest that refusing it would look disproportionate. It didn't matter. Supreme Arbiter von Tessick rose from the highest gallery. He was Valkyrie. He had held the Arbiter's seat for 31 years, longer than any predecessor, and he had spent those years constructing a concord that ran on his patience, his relationships, and his carefully maintained network of mutual obligations. Von Tessick was not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that. He was a precise man. He saw the Concord as a machine, and he maintained it the way an engineer maintains an engine, by removing components that caused friction and replacing them with components that did not. Humanity was friction. "Ambassador Castillo," he said. His voice filled the chamber without amplification. "The Concord Accession Committee has completed its review of Earth's candidacy." Castillo waited. She was holding the edge of the podium. I noticed her knuckles were pale. "The committee has identified 17 material breaches of the pre-accession conduct framework. These breaches include unauthorized technology transfer, undisclosed military construction, and covert economic manipulation of Concord member markets." The chamber went very still. "In accordance with Concord Charter Section 41, the accession process is suspended, effective immediately." Castillo didn't flinch. "May I see the committee's findings?" "The findings are classified under security protocol. Arbiter Tessick, with respect, you're accusing my government of 17 violations and refusing to show the evidence. That's not a legal process. That's a sentence. The Concord's internal security processes are not subject to external review. Ambassador Castillo, your diplomatic credentials are hereby. I have treaty-protected immunity. You cannot revoke your immunity," Tessick said, "was contingent on active accession status. Accession has been suspended. Your immunity is dissolved." The chamber erupted. Not in protest. In recognition. I could see it in every face: the delegations who had known, the delegations who were realizing, and the delegations who were calculating in real time what this meant for their own positions. The Keth sat in silence. The Thessari delegate was gripping the arm of his chair. I was standing by the eastern pillar. My hands were shaking. "Ambassador Castillo," Tessick said, "you are hereby charged with espionage against the Concord, in violation of statutes. These charges are fabricated." Castillo's voice was steady, absolutely steady. "And every person in this room knows it. You will be detained pending tribunal. My government will not recognize this proceeding." "Your government," Tessick said, and there was something in his voice that was not cruelty, but was adjacent to it, the satisfaction of an engineer watching a component slide into place, "is not a party to these proceedings. You are alone, Ambassador. As of this moment, you represent nothing." The Valkyrie security detail entered the chamber. Castillo looked at them. She looked at the galleries. She found the Keth delegation. I watched her eyes track upward, and I saw Keth Oren incline his head by the smallest possible degree. Then she closed her briefcase, picked it up, and walked toward the security detail without being escorted. She stopped once. She turned back to the podium and said, to the room, to the record, to no one and everyone, "My name is Elara Castillo. I came here to ask if we could sit down. Remember that." They took her through the eastern corridor. I was close enough to see her face. She was not crying. She was not angry. She was counting the guards. That detail didn't mean anything to me then. It means everything to me now. I should explain what happened next with precision, because the Concord's official record is a work of such meticulous fiction that even I, who was there, sometimes catch myself half believing it. The official record states that Ambassador Castillo was afforded full legal representation, a fair tribunal, and the opportunity to contest the charges against her. What happened was this. Castillo was held in a detention suite on the Athenium's lower level. She was permitted no contact with her aides, who had been confined to the Meridian under guard. Her request for legal counsel was processed through the Bureau's standard channels, which meant it was routed through 11 administrative offices across 4 departments before arriving at the Legal Affairs Division, where it was classified as a non-urgent pre-tribunal inquiry and assigned a processing window of 60 days. The tribunal was scheduled for 72 hours later. I know this because I processed the scheduling paperwork. It crossed my desk because the tribunal required a cultural liaison to certify that the proceedings met the minimum standards for the accused species' legal traditions. I was the Bureau's designated human cultural liaison. I had been assigned the role 2 years earlier because I had once attended a 3-day seminar on human social customs and no one else wanted the job. I certified the proceedings, I checked the box, I submitted the form. I am telling you this so you understand what I am. The tribunal convened in a closed chamber. No public gallery, no press, no representatives from Earth. The 3-judge panel consisted of Valkyrie jurists, selected by Tessik's office. The evidence was presented in sealed session. Castillo was permitted to make a statement. I was not in the room. I was told afterward what she said. I have since obtained the recording through channels that I will not describe. I have listened to it 400 times. I will share some of it now because the Concord would prefer I did not. This tribunal is a performance, she said. The charges are fabricated, the judges are selected, and the outcome is predetermined. I say this not as a defense, but as a record. Whoever listens to this recording, and someone will because that's what humans do, we keep records. I want you to know that I understood what was happening. I was not confused. I was not afraid. I was angry, and I am choosing to be clear instead. She paused. The evidence you've presented accuses Earth of covert military construction. You're referring to the Callisto yards. They're not covert. They're visible on any deep-range scan. We build in the open because we have nothing to hide. You're accusing us of technology transfer violations. The technologies in question were sold under commercial licenses negotiated in good faith with conquered member states who were eager to buy. If the buyers violated transfer restrictions, the buyers are accountable, not the seller. You're accusing us of economic manipulation. We call it competitive pricing. I understand the difference may be confusing to civilizations accustomed to cartel structures. Someone on the panel told her to limit her remarks. I'll limit my remarks when you limit your charges to ones that are real. The tribunal convicted her in 11 minutes. The sentence was not imprisonment. The sentence was what the Concord calls diplomatic nullification. I need to explain this term. Diplomatic nullification is a legal status reserved for individuals found guilty of espionage against the Concord. It strips all legal protections, all treaty rights, and all recognition of the individual's government as a party of interest. In practical terms, it means the convicted person ceases to exist as a legal entity. They are no longer a diplomat. They are no longer a citizen of a recognized state. They are no longer, in the eyes of the Concord, a person. What happens to non-persons in Concord custody is not specified in the charter. That ambiguity is the point. They executed Elara Castillo at 03:47 local time in the detention suite by chemical injection. She was awake. She had asked to be awake. Her last recorded words were to the attending physician, a Thessari medic, who, I would learn much later, resigned from the Concord Medical Corps the following day and never practiced again. She said, "Tell them I was here. Tell them I said hello." The physician's resignation letter, which I obtained years afterward, contained a single line. I joined the Corps to preserve life. I was ordered to end one. The life I ended was the most dignified person in the room. Earth was notified through standard diplomatic channels at 0400. The notification was 7 lines long. It stated that Ambassador Castillo had been found guilty of espionage and that the sentence had been carried out. It expressed the Concord's hope that this matter would not impede future relations. 7 lines. For a woman who had come to ask if her species could sit down. The Concord expected a response within the hour. This was not optimism. It was based on modeling. The Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Division had constructed detailed predictive frameworks for every Concord species, and the human model, which I had contributed cultural data to, another fact I will not let you forget, predicted one of 3 responses: diplomatic protest, economic retaliation, or military posturing. The model assigned probabilities: diplomatic protest, 62%, economic retaliation, 27%, military posturing, 11%. 1 hour passed, no response. 2 hours, nothing. 3 hours, 4, 5. At the 5-hour mark, the Bureau's Communications Division ran a full diagnostic on every relay, every channel, every frequency connecting Concord Space to Sol system. Everything was functional. The channels were open. Earth was simply not using them. I was in the Bureau's Operations Center when the silence entered its 6th hour. The room was designed for crisis management. Banks of communication stations, strategic displays, real-time data feeds from across conquered space. It was fully staffed. Every station was occupied, every display was active, and every display showed the same thing. Nothing. No transmissions from Earth, no transmissions from human colonies, no transmissions from human commercial vessels, which numbered in the thousands across conquered space, no transmissions from the Callisto yards, no transmissions from the 17 human-operated relay stations that handled 40% of the frontier's commercial traffic. Not silence as absence, silence as action. Every human transmitter in the galaxy had gone dark simultaneously. Commercial contracts mid-execution abandoned. Supply shipments in transit engines cold, transponders off, ships drifting at their last heading. Human medical personnel on 14 Concord worlds had walked out of their facilities without a word, leaving patient files open on their screens. The Thessari delegate burst into the operations center at the 5-hour 40 mark, and he was not calm. "Our agricultural network," he said. "The humans designed it, the humans maintain it. Every node just went offline. We have 11 billion people who eat because that network functions. Do you understand what you've done?" Tessic was in the room. He did not look at the Thessari delegate. "They're posturing," Tessic said. "This is economic leverage. It will resolve within the day." Resolve? The Thessari delegate's coloring had shifted to the deep amber that indicates acute stress. "Arbiter, my government has 72 hours of food distribution reserves. After that, the humans are not going to starve 11 billion Thessari delegate. They are making a point. The point will be made, and then the channels will reopen." "How do you know that?" Tessic looked at him with the patience of a man who had spent 31 years being the calmest person in every room. "Because that is what rational actors do." 6 hours. The silence held, and then it broke. But not the way Tessic expected. Not the way anyone expected. Not the way the models predicted. At exactly 0947, 6 hours and 3 minutes after the notification was sent, every communication system in conquered space received a transmission. Every system. Military, civilian, commercial, personal, encrypted channels, open channels, diplomatic channels, entertainment frequencies. Every device capable of receiving a signal received this one, simultaneously, on every frequency the Concorde used. And one frequency, the Concorde did not. The transmission was audio only, 31 seconds long. A single human voice, female, calm, speaking in Concorde Standard with a slight accent I later identified as East African. This is what it said. "This is Fleet Admiral Kenyatta Odhiambo, United Earth Naval Command. At 0347 this morning, the Galactic Concorde executed Ambassador Elara Castillo, a civilian diplomat operating under treaty protection, on fabricated charges without legal process in a closed room. Ambassador Castillo came to you unarmed and in good faith. You killed her. There will be no negotiation. There will be no protest. There will be no economic retaliation. Instead, I am going to tell you what is about to happen, because Ambassador Castillo believed that honesty between civilizations was possible, and I will honor her belief one final time. In 14 hours, the 2nd and 5th Combined Fleets will arrive at Jalissa Station. They will retrieve Ambassador Castillo's remains. They will retrieve her personal effects, including her father's briefcase. Any vessel, station, or installation that interferes with this retrieval will be removed. This is not a threat. This is a schedule. Odhiambo out." 31 seconds. The room went cold. Not metaphorically. The environmental systems on the operations center registered a 2-degree temperature drop, which was later attributed to the simultaneous activation of every cooling system in the communications array. But I felt it in my bones. Tessic stood very still. 14 hours, someone said. Tessic turned to the Valkyrie military liaison. "Where are the 2nd and 5th Combined Fleets?" "We don't know." "You don't know. Arbiter, we have never known where Earth's primary fleet groups are. Humanity does not announce fleet movements. Our tracking systems have intermittent contacts on their frontier patrols, but the combined fleets, their core battle groups, have never been observed outside Sol system." "Then how do they arrive in 14 hours? The liaison said nothing. "How do they arrive in 14 hours from Sol? That is a 40-day transit at maximum observed human FTL speeds." The liaison still said nothing. Because the answer was one of two things, and both were terrifying. Either the fleets were already close, which meant humanity had pre-positioned warships near conquered space without anyone detecting them, or human FTL was faster than anyone knew. Tessic processed this. I watched him process it. He was not a stupid man. He was not a cowardly man. He was a man who had built a machine and was watching it encounter a variable he had not accounted for. 14 hours, he said. Mobilize the Concord Defense Fleet. Full deployment around Jalissa Station. Open a channel to Earth and offer to negotiate the return of the ambassador's remains. Arbiter, the transmission said there would be no negotiation. Open the channel. They opened the channel. They transmitted the offer. They waited. Earth did not respond. They transmitted again and again, 12 times across the next 3 hours. Each transmission met the same response. Silence. But not empty silence. Monitored silence. The Bureau's signal analysts confirmed that every transmission was received. The acknowledgement protocols fired. Someone on the other end was listening. They simply chose not to speak. I went to my quarters and sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my hands together until my joints ached. And I thought about Elara Castillo standing at the podium saying, "I came here to ask if we could sit down." And I thought about the box I had checked on the tribunal certification form. And I thought about the fact that in 14 hours, something was going to arrive at this station, and whatever it was, I had helped make it necessary. I did not sleep. No one on Jalissa Station slept that night. The Concord Defense Fleet took position around Jalissa Station with the efficiency of long practice. 218 warships arranged in a layered defensive sphere, the largest concentration of military force the Concord had deployed in over a century. Valkyrie dreadnoughts at the core, Bravari electronic warfare frigates at the perimeter, Thessari carrier groups covering the approaches. It was, by any rational assessment, overwhelming. I watched the deployment from the Athenium's observation gallery, where a small crowd of civilian staff and minor diplomats had gathered, because there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do. The gallery's panoramic windows faced the station's main approach vector. The stars were very bright. The warships were visible as clusters of running lights, moving into formation with mechanical precision. Hora Tessic addressed the Concord via closed session at 0200. I was not present, but the address was leaked within minutes by a Thessari staffer. Tessic's message was measured. Humanity had made an aggressive declaration. The Concord would respond with proportional defensive posture. If the human fleets arrived, they would be met with an offer to negotiate. If they refused negotiation, they would be met with force. The Concord's combined military capability exceeded known human capability by a factor of 8. There was no scenario in which two fleet groups could threaten this station. At 0600, the long-range sensor net detected transition signatures. I was in the observation gallery. I had been there all night. My uniform was wrinkled. I had eaten nothing. I was standing next to a Thessari logistics clerk named Miri, who I had known casually for 3 years, and who was gripping the railing with both hands. "How many ships?" someone asked. The sensor data was displayed on the gallery's information screen. The numbers were updating in real time as the transition signatures resolved. 47. That was the initial count. The Concord Defense Fleet outnumbered them nearly 5-1. The gallery exhaled. Someone laughed, a short, nervous sound. Then the signatures kept resolving. The problem was range. Human FTL transitioned at distances that Concord sensors were not calibrated to detect. The initial count of 47 had been based on the closest signatures. As the sensor net extended its sweep, recalibrated and extended again, the number climbed. 47, 92, 160, 230. The gallery was quiet. 314, 381. I heard Miri whisper something in Thessari that I think was a prayer. 449. The number stabilized. 449 warships arranged in a formation the Bureau's military analysts had never seen. Not a sphere, not a wedge, not any conventional attack or defense pattern. The human ships were arrayed in a flat, open crescent, a shape that maximized their forward sensor and weapons profile while leaving their rear entirely exposed. A military analyst, patched into the gallery's communication feed, was explaining what this meant to someone who outranked him. "It's not a battle formation, sir. It's a statement. They're showing us their full face and leaving their back undefended. They're saying they don't expect to need to retreat. Or they don't intend to. Yes, sir, or that." The Crescent advanced toward Jalissa Station at a speed that was, I would learn later, exactly 1/3 of the human fleet's maximum sublight capability. Not rushing, not cautious, deliberate. The pace of someone walking toward a door they intend to open regardless of what is on the other side. At 0730, the lead ship of the human formation crossed the Concorde Defense Fleet's outer engagement boundary. It was not the largest ship in the formation. It was not in the center. It was slightly forward and to the left of the Crescent's midpoint, and it was broadcasting a single identifier on every frequency, UES Castillo. The ship had been renamed. The transponder logs obtained later confirmed that the vessel's original designation was UES Johannesburg, a heavy cruiser commissioned 4 years earlier. Sometime in the 6 hours of silence, someone had authorized the change. A heavy cruiser named for a dead ambassador, leading 449 warships toward the station where she was killed. The conquered defense fleet held position. The human crescent continued to advance. The distance closed. 200,000 kilometers. 100,000. 50,000. Tessik's voice came over the Concorde's general channel. Calm, measured. The voice of a man who maintained engines. "Human fleet, this is Supreme Arbiter von Tessik of the Galactic Concord. We acknowledge your presence and your stated intent to retrieve Ambassador Castillo's remains. The Concorde is prepared to facilitate this retrieval through standard diplomatic channels. Please halt your advance and designate a liaison vessel for coordination." The Crescent did not slow. "Human fleet, you are approaching the defensive perimeter of a Concorde installation. Continued advance without response will be interpreted as a hostile act. 20,000 kilometers. Human fleet respond." Silence. 10,000 kilometers. The Crescent was close enough now that individual ships were visible through the gallery windows. I could see them dark shapes against the stars, running lights extinguished, no illumination, no markings visible at this range. They were shadows, a crescent of shadows, advancing in perfect formation without a single unnecessary emission. And then, at 7,000 kilometers, Admiral Odiambo responded. Not on the diplomatic channel, not on the military channel, on every channel simultaneously, just as before. Audio only, the same calm voice. "Arbiter Tessik, you used the word facilitate. Ambassador Castillo came here in good faith and you facilitated her death. You used the word coordinate. You coordinated her prosecution, her conviction, and her execution. You used the word diplomatic. You dissolved her diplomatic immunity and killed her in a room with no windows. I am not going to use any of your words. I am going to use mine. We are coming to bring her home. Move or be moved. There is no third option." The Crescent advanced. The conquered defense fleet did not move. 3,000 kilometers, 2,000. The weapons range of a Valkyrie dreadnought is 6,000 kilometers. The entire human fleet was inside the kill zone. Every conquered gun could fire. The mathematics were simple. The mathematics were also irrelevant because at 1,000 kilometers the human crescent did something that the gallery's military analyst could not explain and that I will never forget. The crescent split. Not into attack groups, not into flanking elements. The 449 ships opened their formation like a hand unclenching, each vessel moving to a precisely calculated position until the human fleet had enveloped the Concorde defense fleet completely, above and below and on every side, without firing a single weapon, without a single collision warning, without a single deviation from perfect, silent, choreographed motion. They had not come to fight the conquered fleet. They had come around it. 218 conquered warships sat inside a sphere of 449 human vessels, every gun aimed inward, and the only sound on every channel in Concorde space was the open carrier signal of the UES Castillo, broadcasting nothing, waiting. Miri was crying. I was not. I was too far beyond tears for tears. I was in a place I had never been before, a place where every assumption I had built my career on was in the process of collapsing. And the collapse was not violent. It was structural, the way a building fails when you remove the wrong beam and everything above it simply descends. The Concorde Defense Fleet held position for 4 minutes. Then the Valkyrie dreadnought Sovereign Will Tessic's flagship powered down its weapons. One by one, the rest of the fleet followed. A single shuttle launched from the UAS Castillo at 0812. It was small, unremarkable. The kind of utility shuttle used for personnel transfer, not the kind of ceremonial vessel a civilization deploys for political theater. It crossed the gap between the human perimeter and Jalissa Station without escort, without ceremony, without a single communication beyond the standard docking request submitted through the station's automated traffic system. The shuttle docked at Bay 7. I know this because I walked there. I don't know why I walked there. I was not required to. I was not invited to. I was in every operational sense irrelevant to what was happening. But my legs carried me through the Athenium's corridors, past security checkpoints that were unmanned because the guards had gone to the windows, down 3 levels to the docking ring, and I stood in the access corridor outside Bay 7 with 11 other people who had no reason to be there, except that they could not be anywhere else. The shuttle's hatch opened. 6 humans walked out. They were not soldiers. That was the first thing I registered. They wore dark civilian clothing, simple, unadorned, the kind of clothes humans wear to funerals. 4 women and 2 men. They carried no weapons. They carried a stretcher between them, folded, and a flag, blue and white and green, folded into a triangle. The oldest of them was a woman with white hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved by patience rather than age. She walked at the front. She did not look at any of us standing in the corridor. She looked straight ahead, at the interior of the station, as though she already knew exactly where she was going. They walked in silence. Jalissa Station's corridors are designed for traffic. Wide, efficient, well-lit. That morning they were lined with people, not crowds, not protesters, just individuals standing against the walls, watching. Concorde staff, diplomats, maintenance workers, a Bravari trade delegation that had been stranded by the communications blackout. A Keth cultural attaché who I had never seen leave his quarters in 3 years of working on the same level. No one spoke. The 6 humans walked through the station to the detention level. They knew the route. I do not know how they knew the route. The station's internal layout was not public information. Someone had given it to them, or they had obtained it, and I have spent 17 years wondering which. I followed them. I stayed 30 meters back. I told myself I was observing in an official capacity. I was lying. I was following because I needed to see the end of what I had helped begin. They reached the detention suite. The door was open. The Valkyrie guards who had been posted there were gone, withdrawn on someone's order. I never learned whose. The 6 humans entered. The door stayed open. I heard nothing for several minutes. Then I heard a sound I recognized, because it is the same sound in every species I have ever encountered. Someone was weeping. Controlled, private weeping, the sound of a person who would rather not be heard but cannot stop. They emerged carrying Elara Castillo in a body bag on the stretcher. The flag was draped over her. The woman with white hair was carrying the leather briefcase, and they walked back through the station. This time something was different. The people lining the corridors, the diplomats, the staff, the stranded delegates, were not just watching. Some of them were bowing. Not many, not a coordinated gesture. Individual beings from 3 or 4 different species, lowering their heads as the stretcher passed. The Keth cultural attaché pressed his palm to the wall as the humans passed him. I had attended the seminar on Keth customs. I knew what that meant. It was a gesture reserved for the honored dead of an allied species. The Keth had not classified humanity as allied. He was doing it on his own authority. He was doing it because the alternative was standing there with his hands at his sides while a dead woman was carried past him, and he could not bear it. I could not bear it either. When the stretcher was 10 meters from me, I stepped forward. The woman with white hair looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were dry and red and steady. I stamped her transit visa, I said. I do not know why I said it. I processed her entry documentation. I certified her tribunal as meeting cultural standards. I want you to know that. She studied me for 3 seconds that lasted a year. Did you know? She asked. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what they would do. But you knew something. Yes. She nodded. She did not forgive me. She did not condemn me. She said, "Her briefcase has a letter inside for her daughter. The daughter's name is Luciana. She's 14. If you want to do something with what you knew, you can make sure the letter gets home." Then she walked past me, and they carried Elara Castillo back to the shuttle, and the shuttle departed Bay 7, and I stood in the docking corridor holding nothing, and knowing that I would carry the weight of those 3 seconds for the rest of my life, and that it was not enough, and that nothing would be. The human fleet withdrew from Jalissa Station at 0900. The same precise, choreographed motion in reverse. The sphere contracted. The crescent reformed. The 449 ships turned and moved away at the same deliberate 1/3 speed. No parting transmission, no ultimatum, no demands. The UES Castillo was the last to leave. As it passed the Concord Defense Fleet's perimeter, it broadcast a single data packet on the Concord's standard diplomatic frequency. The packet contained one item: Ambassador Castillo's original credentials, the formal documentation of her appointment as Earth's first representative to the Concorde. The covering note read, "She was ours. We came to get her. Now we're leaving. What happens next is your decision. Choose well." The fleet vanished into FTL. Tessic stood in the Athenium's operations center, surrounded by his staff, his military advisors, his diplomatic corps, and the visible wreckage of 31 years of careful institutional engineering. The engine he had built was seizing. And I sat in my quarters with my hands on my knees and realized that I had a letter to deliver. I need to go back. Not in time. In information. Because the story I've told you so far, the betrayal, the silence, the fleet, that's the story the galaxy knows. It's the story that played across every information network from the core to the frontier. It's the story that ended careers, toppled trade agreements, and sent the Concorde into a constitutional crisis that is, as of this telling, still unresolved. But there's another story underneath it, and that's the one Davi Thenis wanted me to tell. During the 6 hours of silence after the notification, and before Admiral Odiambo's transmission, something happened that was not detected by the Concorde's communication systems. It was not detected because it occurred on a frequency the Concorde did not monitor. A frequency the Concorde had, in fact, formally decommissioned 700 years earlier, during the Third Standardization Accord, when the 11-member species agreed to consolidate all interstellar communication onto a unified spectrum and abandon the legacy bands that predated FTL travel. The frequency was called Band 0. It was the electromagnetic equivalent of a dirt road, slow, low bandwidth, limited to light speed propagation, functionally useless for a civilization that communicated through quantum-entangled relay networks. No one used Band 0. No one had used it in centuries. The receivers that could detect it had been mothballed or scrapped across the entire Concorde, except on the frontier, except in the places where the Concorde's infrastructure didn't reach, where the relay networks hadn't been built, where the species too young or too poor or too peripheral to matter had been left with whatever technology they'd had before the Concorde arrived. Species like the Dreth. I did not know the Dreth existed until 4 months after the Castillo incident. Most people didn't. The Dreth were a pre-FTL civilization on a world called Resk 4, a cold, rocky planet in a system so far from the core that the Concorde's official survey maps labeled it low priority/deferred assessment. They had been discovered by a Concorde survey vessel 40 years earlier, assessed as technologically nascent, no strategic value, and effectively forgotten. The Dreth had radio. They had basic rocketry. They had, according to the survey report, a promising but undeveloped industrial base, and no capacity for independent interstellar communication. The survey report was wrong about the last part. The Dreth had built a transmitter, not a quantum relay, not a subspace array. A radio transmitter, electromagnetic, light speed limited and aimed at the stars with the blind faith of a species that had been told the galaxy was full of civilizations and given no means to reach them. They had been transmitting on Band 0 for 31 years. No one heard them. Not the Concorde, not the 11-member species, not the frontier patrols or the commercial fleets or the survey vessels that occasionally passed through Dreth space without stopping. No one except the humans. Humanity had never stopped monitoring Band 0. While the Concorde had decommissioned the frequency and scrapped the receivers, Earth had maintained a network of passive listening stations across its frontier-old equipment, most of it repurposed from the pre-FTL era, when humanity had aimed its own dishes at the stars and listened for exactly the kind of signal the Dreth were sending. The network was called the Long Ear. It was staffed by volunteers mostly, retirees, enthusiasts, people who found meaning in sitting in quiet rooms and monitoring frequencies that hadn't carried a signal in decades. People who never stopped listening. 7 months before the Castillo incident, a long-ear station on the edge of human space, a converted cargo module bolted to an asteroid in a system called Kepler 894, detected a repeating pattern on Band 0. The station's operator was a 67-year-old retired communications technician named Ifeoma Achebe. She had been running the station alone for 9 years. She had detected nothing in all that time. The signal was faint, degraded, fragmented by interstellar medium interference. But it was there, and it was structured, and it was repeating, and Achebe recognized it instantly because it was using a protocol that humanity itself had used a century earlier. A basic mathematical primer, followed by chemical element sequences, followed by a message in a constructed language designed to be decoded by any species with a periodic table. The Dreth had reverse-engineered the protocol from old human transmissions that had been propagating through space since before humanity left Earth. They had learned to say hello in a language humans had invented for exactly this purpose, and then been told was obsolete. Achebe forwarded the signal to Earth. Earth dispatched a linguistics team. The team decoded the message. And the message, the content of it, is the reason I am telling you this story, and the reason Davi Thenis spent 10 years asking me to tell it. The message was an SOS, not a greeting, not a mathematical proof of intelligence, not a cultural exchange. An SOS. The Dreth were dying. Resk 4 was a marginal world. Cold, mineral poor, prone to tectonic instability. The Dreth had built a civilization there through persistence and ingenuity, but they were losing a war against their own planet. A series of volcanic events over the previous decade had disrupted their agriculture, contaminated their water systems, and most critically, released atmospheric particulates that were cooling their already cold world toward a tipping point that their models predicted would render the surface uninhabitable within 20 years. They needed help. Specifically, they needed atmospheric remediation technology, agricultural adaptation systems, and enough energy infrastructure to survive a decades-long volcanic winter. They needed, in short, exactly the kind of technology that the Concord classified as restricted transfer. Technology that could not be provided to a pre-accession species without authorization from the full Concord Council. The same council that had just executed a human ambassador for, among other fabricated charges, unauthorized technology transfer. I will let you sit with that for a moment. Earth received the decoded Dreth SOS and verified the situation through long-range observation. The data confirmed the Dreth's own projections: atmospheric collapse within 2 decades, extinction-level consequences, no indigenous solution available. Earth then did something that I did not understand when I first learned of it, and that I now understand so completely it makes my chest ache. They did not petition the Concord. They did not file a request through the Pre-Accession Species Aid Protocol. They did not submit documentation to the Bureau of External Development. They did not engage any of the institutional mechanisms that the Concord had designed for exactly this situation. Mechanisms that, by design, took between 5 and 15 years to process, required unanimous council approval, and had been used exactly twice in 4,000 years. They loaded 3 cargo vessels with atmospheric processing equipment, agricultural seed stock adapted for volcanic winter conditions, water purification systems, portable fusion generators, and a medical team. And they sent them to Resk 4, without permission, without authorization, without telling anyone. They sent them on the day after they received the decoded SOS because they had the cargo vessels, they had the equipment, and the Dreth did not have 15 years to wait for a committee to decide whether they deserved to survive. The 3 vessels departed human space 11 days before Ambassador Castillo arrived at Jalissa Station. They were in transit, moving through Concord space in what I can only describe as quiet defiance, while Castillo was being arrested, convicted, and killed. And this is the part that matters. This is the part that Davi wanted the galaxy to hear. The 3 cargo vessels were not warships. They carried no weapons. They had no escort. They were moving through space controlled by a civilization that had just murdered a human diplomat, with no protection except the assumption that the conquered did not monitor the routes they were using, because the routes led to a system the conquered had labeled no strategic value. The routes were safe. The assumption was correct. The conquered did not see them, because the conquered was not looking. The conquered was watching Jalissa Station. The conquered was watching the 2nd and 5th combined fleets. The conquered was watching the spectacle, the crescent, the envelopment, the flag-draped stretcher, the UES Castillo. The conquered was watching the story it understood. It missed the one it didn't. 3 cargo ships crewed by people whose names were not famous, whose faces were never broadcast, who would never be featured in a diplomatic briefing or a military analysis or a strategic assessment. 3 cargo ships carrying seed stock and water filters and portable fusion generators slipped through the cracks of a galactic crisis and reached Resk 4 on the day the human fleet withdrew from Jalissa Station. The Dreth had been transmitting their SOS for 31 years. Humanity had been listening for longer. I delivered the letter. That requires more explanation than it sounds like. Castillo's briefcase had been placed in the Concord's evidence archive, tagged as material related to a closed espionage case. Accessing it required authorization from the Bureau's legal division, which I did not have. But I did have the access codes for the archive's cataloging system, because I had spent 3 years processing visa paperwork that was stored in the same database, and the Concord's information architecture was old enough that access permissions had not been updated to reflect the security escalation. I walked into the archive. I opened the briefcase. Inside was a sheaf of paper handwritten notes, most of them in Spanish, which I could not read, and a sealed envelope addressed to Luciana, mi corazón. I took the envelope. This was theft. This was tampering with evidence in a closed security case. This was, under Concord law, an offense carrying a minimum sentence of 3 years in a rehabilitation facility. I took the envelope and I walked out of the archive and I went to the docking ring and I boarded a commercial transport to the Frontier Relay Station at Tessex Gate. Named, yes, for the Arbiter's family, because the Concord's infrastructure was built on patronage and no one thought to question the names on the walls, and from Tessex Gate, I booked passage on a Thessari freighter to the edge of conquered space, and from there I hired a Frontier courier to carry me to the human border station at Waypoint Echo. And at Waypoint Echo, I presented myself to the human customs officer and said, "I have a letter for a girl named Luciana Castillo. Her mother asked me to deliver it." The customs officer looked at me for a long time. He was young. Human men are difficult for me to age, but I believe he was under 30. He had a scar on his left hand that looked like a burn. "You're conquered," he said. "I'm a visa clerk." "You're conquered, and you have Elara Castillo's personal effects, and you're standing at a human border station. Do you understand what that looks like?" "It looks like exactly what it is. A man who didn't do enough, trying to do one thing." He let me through. I do not know why. I have thought about it often, and I believe it is because humans have an extraordinary capacity to assess sincerity, not through analysis, but through something more immediate, something I might call instinct if the word weren't inadequate. He let me through, and he assigned me an escort. A quiet woman named Sergeant Chen, who did not speak to me for the first 4 hours of transit, and they took me to Earth. Earth. I will not describe it the way the travel narratives do. I will not tell you about the blue and white from orbit or the overwhelming green of the surface or the staggering, disorienting volume of water. I will tell you one thing. It smelled like rain. I had never smelled rain. Vialkari worlds are arid. The Concorde stations are climate-controlled. But when I stepped off the shuttle at a landing field outside Bogotá, because of course that was where Luciana lived, her mother's city, her grandfather's city, the air hit me, and it was wet and alive, and it smelled like something growing, and I stood on the landing pad and breathed it in and understood for the first time, in my body rather than my mind, why the humans had come for their ambassador's body with 449 ships. Because this is what they were protecting. Not territory, not resources, not strategic position. This, the rain, the soil, the wet, growing, impossibly green fact of their world. Sergeant Chen took me to an apartment building in a neighborhood that was old and clean and full of trees. She knocked on a door. A girl opened it. Luciana Castillo was 14 years old. She had her mother's dark hair. She had been crying recently, her eyes were swollen, but she was not crying now. She looked at me, at my Valkyrie features, at the Concorde insignia I had forgotten to remove from my jacket, and her expression went through something I cannot describe. Fear, anger, grief, and something else, a fierce, evaluating alertness that I recognized because I had seen it on her mother's face in the Athenaeum. "My name is Oren Tesavari," I said. "I worked at Jalissa Station. Your mother asked me to bring you this." I held out the envelope. Luciana looked at it. She looked at me. "You're one of them," she said. "You're one of the ones who let it happen." "Yes." "Why are you here?" "Because your mother asked me to make sure this reached you, and it was the only thing anyone asked me to do that I could still say yes to." She took the envelope. She didn't open it. She held it against her chest with both hands, the way you hold something that you know is the last of its kind. "Are you sorry?" she asked. "I am, but I don't think sorry is enough." "It's not," she said. "Come inside. You look like you haven't eaten." That was how I entered a human home for the first time, because a 14-year-old girl whose mother had been murdered by my government fed me rice and beans at her kitchen table and did not forgive me and did not turn me away. I stayed on Earth for 3 days. Sergeant Chen remained with me the entire time. On the second day, she spoke to me for the first time voluntarily. "You know about Resk 4? She asked. I did not, she told me. Sergeant Chen had a cousin on one of the 3 cargo vessels, a systems engineer named David Chen, 34, no military background, who had volunteered for the Resk 4 relief mission, because as Chen told me with the flat matter-of-factness I was learning to recognize as a human emotional management strategy. He saw the signal data and couldn't not go. He saw it and couldn't not go. I have turned that phrase over in my mind for 17 years, and I have come to believe it is the most concise expression of the thing about humanity that the Concorde failed to model. The 3 cargo vessels reached Resk 4 without incident. They established contact with the Dreth using the Band Zero protocol. The first exchange was, by all accounts, the most strained and joyful and terrifying conversation in the history of either species. 2 civilizations separated by a technological gulf of centuries, communicating through a frequency the galaxy had thrown away, using a protocol designed by humans who had been dead for 100 years, in a constructed language that existed for no reason except that someone, long ago, had believed this exact moment was possible. The Dreth had been dying. The humans brought water filters. I want to sit in that sentence. I want you to sit in it. The Concorde had known the Dreth existed. The survey was on file. The data was accessible to anyone with mid-level clearance. The Concorde had the resources to help. The Concorde had the technology. The Concorde had the mandate. Article 7 of its own charter required reasonable assistance to pre-spacefaring civilizations in existential crisis. The Concorde did nothing because the Dreth had no strategic value, and helping them would have generated no political leverage. Humanity came because someone in a converted cargo module on an asteroid heard a signal and couldn't not listen. And the thing that guts me, the thing that Davi Thenis needed me to say, is that the Concorde tried to stop it. When the Concorde learned about the Resk 4 relief mission 3 weeks after the fleet withdrawal, through a routine Frontier Patrol report, the Bureau classified it as an unauthorized technology transfer and issued an interdiction order. The order directed Concorde enforcement vessels to intercept the human cargo ships, confiscate the equipment, and detain the crew. The order crossed my desk, because I was the Bureau's human cultural liaison, and the order required a cultural impact assessment before execution, and I was the only person in the Bureau certified to provide one. I sat at my desk and I looked at the order, and I thought about Elara Castillo saying I came here to ask if we could sit down. I thought about Luciana holding the envelope against her chest. I thought about rice and beans at a kitchen table in Bogota. I thought about Ifeoma Achebe, 67 years old, alone on an asteroid, listening to a frequency that no one had used in centuries because she believed someone might still be speaking on it. And I thought about the Dreth, a species I had never met, dying on a world I had never seen, saved by people who had no obligation to save them except the obligation that humans apparently feel toward anyone who manages to say help in a language they can hear. I filed the cultural impact assessment. It said, interdiction of the RESC-4 relief operation will result in the extinction of a sentient species. Cultural impact, total. Recommendation, do not proceed. That was not the assessment they wanted. It was kicked back. I was told to revise it. I was told the geopolitical implications outweighed the humanitarian considerations. I was told that the precedent of allowing unilateral aid operations would destabilize the Concorde's regulatory authority. I filed the assessment again, unrevised. I was told that refusal to comply with a revision directive constituted insubordination. I filed it a third time. They reassigned the assessment to a different cultural liaison, a Brevari analyst who had never met a human and who produced a compliant report within 2 days. The interdiction order was approved. I resigned from the bureau the next morning. I resigned and I took the only copy of my original assessment and I gave it to a Thessari journalist named Corin Weil, and Corin published it alongside the interdiction order, and within 72 hours the story was on every information network in the Western Spiral. The Concorde had executed a human ambassador for fabricated crimes, and now it was trying to stop humans from saving an entire species from extinction. The Thessari government withdrew from the interdiction. The Brevari refused to participate. The Keth issued a formal statement, their first public statement in 11 years, that said in its entirety, "We note that the youngest species in the Concorde is the only one that heard the call. We note this and will remember it." The interdiction was quietly rescinded. The 3 cargo vessels completed their mission. The Dreth received the atmospheric processing equipment, the agricultural systems, the water purification technology, and the fusion generators. David Chen spent 9 months on RESC-4, teaching Dreth engineers to maintain the systems. He sent letters home to Sergeant Chen. She showed me one. It said, "The sky here is gray all the time, but Venna, she's the Dreth I work with most. She showed me a drawing her daughter made of what the sky looked like before the eruptions. It was purple. I told her our sky is blue. She didn't believe me. She said that was too beautiful to be real." A child drawing a sky she remembered in a color a human thought was too beautiful. I carry that. I need to tell you what happened to the Concorde, because the Concorde is where this story began, and the Concorde is the machine I served and the machine I broke, and I owe it the accuracy of a competent witness, even though I no longer owe it anything else. Tessic resigned 4 months after the fleet withdrawal. Not because he was forced, because the Thessari, who had depended on human agricultural technology and whose 11 billion citizens had spent 3 terrifying days contemplating what it meant when the humans turned off the network, formally withdrew their confidence in his leadership. The Brevari followed. The Keth, characteristically, said nothing, but their delegates stopped attending sessions, which in Keth diplomatic language was equivalent to setting the building on fire. The Concorde did not collapse. It was too old and too embedded for that. But it cracked. The constitutional crisis I mentioned earlier, the one that is, 17 years later, still unresolved, began in earnest when the Thessari delegate introduced a motion to formally acknowledge that the tribunal and execution of Ambassador Castillo had been illegitimate. The motion was blocked by the Valkyrie delegation. It has been reintroduced every session since. It has been blocked every time. The Concorde has spent 17 years unable to admit what it did, and the inability to admit it has become the thing that defines it, the way a fracture that never sets correctly becomes the shape of the bone. Tessic himself, I should say this. Von Tessic was not a monster. I worked in his institution for 11 years. He was precise, disciplined, and devoted to a vision of galactic order that he genuinely believed served the interests of all species. He believed that controlling the rate of younger species advancement prevented the wars and collapses that had marked the galaxy's pre-Concorde history. He was not wrong about the history. He was wrong about the method. He was wrong about what control costs when it is applied to living things. He retired to his family's estate on Valkar Prime. He published a memoir 2 years later. I read it. The section on the Castillo incident is 11 pages long. He refers to it as a regulatory action that produced unintended diplomatic consequences. He does not use the word execution. He does not use her name. I have nothing left to say about von Tessic. Humanity did not rejoin the Concorde. I want to be clear about this because it defies the narrative structure that people expect. There was no triumphant return. No renegotiated terms, no humanity taking its rightful seat among the stars. The Concord extended 7 formal invitations to resume the accession process over the following decade. Earth declined each one. The declinations were polite, brief, and identical. We appreciate the invitation. We are busy. They were busy. The long-year network expanded from 12 stations to over 100. Volunteers doubled, then tripled. Humanity began systematically scanning every decommissioned frequency band, every abandoned protocol, every piece of electromagnetic debris drifting through the galaxy's margins, listening for signals from species the Concorde had surveyed and forgotten. They found 7. 7 species on 7 worlds, transmitting on frequencies no one monitored, using protocols no one recognized, speaking into a silence they had no reason to believe would ever answer. The humans answered all of them. Not with fleets, not with political statements, with cargo ships, with engineers, with agricultural scientists and water treatment specialists and doctors and teachers, with people like David Chen who saw a signal and couldn't not go. The Concorde watched this happen and did not know what to call it. It was not colonization. The humans claimed no territory, extracted no resources, demanded no allegiance. It was not diplomacy. There were no treaties, no formal agreements, no institutional frameworks. It was not charity. The humans were learning as much as they were teaching, adapting alien techniques and perspectives into their own systems. Davi Thenis called it the thing that doesn't have a name. She was the Concorde's foremost expert on human cultural anthropology, and she spent the last 8 years of her life trying to find a word for what humanity was doing on the frontier, and she never found one that satisfied her. I think the closest she came was during our last conversation, 3 days before she died. "They're not building an empire, Oren," she said. Her voice was weak. The human nurse, the one who would later sing to her, was adjusting her medication. "They're not even building an alliance. They're building a neighborhood. They're taking all the people the Concorde surveyed and filed and forgot, and they're treating them like they live on the same street." "That's not a word," I said. "No," she said. "It's a frequency." I visited RESC-4 twice. The first time was 6 years after the relief mission. The atmospheric processors were working. The sky was still gray, but the models had been revised. Extinction was off the table, replaced by a projected 60-year recovery period that the Dreth and their human partners were working to shorten. Venna, the engineer David Chen had written about, gave me a tour of the processing facility. She was smaller than I expected. The Dreth are compact, dense-boned, adapted for cold and pressure. She spoke Concorde Standard with a heavy accent and a vocabulary that was technically precise and emotionally direct in a way that reminded me painfully of Castillo. She showed me the transmitter. The original, the one that had sent the SOS. It was housed in a concrete bunker on a ridge overlooking the planet's largest agricultural zone fields that were, against all prior modeling, producing food. The transmitter was still operational, still broadcasting on band 0. "Why?" I asked. "You've been found. You have quantum relays now. You can communicate with anyone." Venna looked at me the way humans sometimes look at me when I ask a question that reveals more about me than I intended. "Because someone else might be listening," she said. "Someone else might need to hear that the frequency is not dead. That someone answers." She paused. "The humans taught us that, or no. The humans reminded us. We already knew it. We had been shouting into the dark for 31 years. The humans were the ones who reminded us we were right to shout." I stood in that bunker, on a cold world at the edge of conquered space, listening to a transmitter send a signal into the void on a frequency the galaxy had abandoned, and I understood finally, 17 years late, standing in the exact right place, what Davi had been trying to say. The frequency was not a technology, it was a promise that someone would keep listening, even when there was no reason to. Even when the equipment was old and the signal was faint and the galaxy had moved on to faster, better, more efficient ways of speaking, humans never stopped listening because stopping was the one thing they would not do. Not out of strategy, not out of sentiment, out of a bone-deep, irrational, magnificent conviction that the next signal, the next faint, garbled, desperate voice crying out from a dying world on a frequency no one uses anymore, might be the one that matters. And they were right. They were right every time. My second visit to RESC-4 was for Davi's funeral. She had asked to be buried there, not on her homeworld, Not on a conquered station. On Resk 4, in the soil that the human agricultural team had spent 6 years teaching to grow food again. She said it was the only ground she trusted because it was ground that had been saved by people who gained nothing from saving it. The funeral was small, 12 people, 3 conquered analysts who had worked with her, 2 Dreth engineers, 4 humans from the agricultural team, Sergeant Chen, who had stayed in contact with me across the years for reasons neither of us ever articulated, Luciana Castillo, who was 31 years old and who had become, I will tell you this, and you will make of it what you will, a communications engineer specializing in Band 0 signal detection, her mother's daughter, working on her mother's frequency, listening, and me. The human nurse who had been with Davi at the end sang a song at the graveside. I did not recognize it. Chen told me later it was a hymn, very old, from a tradition that believed the dead could hear you if you sang loud enough and meant it. Luciana read her mother's letter. Not the letter I had delivered. A different one Elara Castillo had written years before the Jalissa appointment, when Luciana was 9. To be opened, when you need to hear my voice and I'm not there. Luciana had been carrying it since she was 9 years old. She had opened it the night her mother died. She had memorized it. She did not need the paper. I will not share the contents. They are not mine to share. But I will tell you that Elara Castillo wrote to her daughter about soil, about how her father, Luciana's grandfather, had taught her that the most important thing about soil is not what it produces, but what it holds. Seeds, water, roots, the dead, the living. Soil holds everything and lets go of nothing, and that is why things grow. Luciana read this over a grave on a world that had been dying and was now, slowly, growing, and I stood in the cold gray air of Resk 4, and I wept, and I was not ashamed. I am 73 years old. I live on Resk 4, not because I was assigned here, because I asked, and the Dreth said yes, and the humans said nothing because they had never been asked and did not consider it their decision. I work in the archive. The Dreth have one now, a proper one, built with human technical assistance, housing the records of every species that has been contacted through the Band 0 network. I catalog. I translate. I do the same kind of work I did at the Bureau, processing documentation, filing records, ensuring that the right information reaches the right people. The work is the same. The purpose is different. At the Bureau, I processed paperwork to maintain a system. Here, I process records to maintain a memory, every signal received, every species contacted, every name. Ifeoma Achebe died 2 years ago. She was 78. She had continued operating her Longyear station until the day her hands couldn't manage the equipment. Her station has been preserved as a monument. It is a converted cargo module on an asteroid in an unremarkable system, and it is the most important room in the galaxy, and almost no one knows it exists. David Chen married Vena's sister. They have 2 children. The children speak 3 languages, Human English, Dreth, and Conquered Standard, and they do not find this remarkable, because to them the galaxy is not a hierarchy of species arranged by seniority. It is a neighborhood. You learn your neighbor's languages. That's what you do. Sergeant Chen retired from the military and opened a restaurant on Waypoint Echo that serves food from 17 worlds. It is, by all accounts, excellent, though I have only eaten there twice because the transit is long and I am old and my knees do not enjoy zero-gravity transfers. Luciana Castillo runs the Longyear network. She expanded it to 300 stations across 7 species territories. Last year, the network detected a new signal, an 18th species, transmitting from a world in the galactic south on a frequency so faint that only the most sensitive equipment could detect it. The signal was a mathematical primer, followed by chemical element sequences, followed by a message. The message was, "Is anyone there?" Luciana's response, transmitted on Band 0 at light speed, slow old, the electromagnetic equivalent of a handwritten letter, was, "Yes, we're here. We've been listening. What do you need?" I am not the hero of this story. I have told you that. I am the man who stamped the visa and checked the box and said nothing when something was wrong, and no amount of letters delivered or assessments filed or archives maintained will change the sequence of events that began with my silence. But Davi asked me to tell it. She asked me to tell it because she believed that the story of what humanity did not, the fleet, not the crescent, not the 449 warships, but the other thing, The quiet thing. The 3 cargo ships and the water filters and the woman on the asteroid who never stopped listening. She believed that story needed to be told by someone who had been on the wrong side of it. Because a story told by the righteous is a victory speech. A story told by the guilty is a confession. And confessions, Davi said, are the only stories that change the listener, because they do not ask you to admire, they ask you to examine. So examine me. Examine the man who said nothing, and then, too late, said something small, and spent the rest of his life in the company of people who had been saying the right thing all along. And then if you are willing, examine the frequency. Band 0 is still active. It is still monitored. It is still slow, still old, still the electromagnetic equivalent of a dirt road. The galaxy has moved on to faster, better, more efficient ways of communicating, and the quantum relays carry more data in a second than Band 0 carries in a year. But someone, right now, on a world you have never heard of, in a system that no survey has deemed strategically relevant, is building a transmitter out of whatever they have, and they are aiming it at the stars, and they are sending a signal that will travel at the speed of light through the dark, degrading as it goes, growing fainter with every parsec, a whisper dissolving into noise. And somewhere on an asteroid in a cargo module, in a quiet room staffed by a volunteer who has been listening for years without hearing anything, someone will catch that whisper. Someone will lean forward. Someone will say, "I hear you." Not because it is efficient, not because it is strategic, not because anyone told them to, because they never stopped listening. And because that refusal, that irrational, stubborn, magnificent refusal to abandon the old frequency, to stop waiting for the voice that hasn't spoken yet, to accept that silence is final, that is the thing about humanity that the Concord could not model and the galaxy cannot replicate. And I, who spent my life inside the machine that tried to silence them, will spend whatever years remain to me trying to explain. They listen because someone might be speaking. That's it. That's the whole thing. Elara Castillo flew 400 light-years to ask if her species could sit down, and they killed her for it. And her species' response was to keep listening to a frequency no one else could hear, and the voice on that frequency was a dying world that had been calling for 31 years, and the humans came, and they brought water filters, and the world didn't die. And tomorrow somewhere, another signal, another whisper, another voice saying, "Is anyone there?" And the answer carried on the slowest, oldest, most obsolete frequency in the galaxy, arriving years after it was sent, faint and degraded and barely distinguishable from noise. The answer will be, "Yes, we're here. We never left."